So yeah, welcome to InterviewReady series, and today we are doing the senior software developer interview session. If this is your first time joining us, I'm Saloni, and I usually host these sessions with my very talented friends and network. Let's dive right in. So WomenWhoCode, I'm from WomenWhoCode. I am a volunteer at WomenWhoCode, and our mission in WomenWhoCode is to inspire women to excel in technology careers. And our vision is to see a world where women are represented as technical executives, founders, VCs, board members, and software engineers. We are this WomenWhoCode group is existing in 134 countries around the world with over 100,000 members. And all of our events are online currently, so anyone can join our events. They are usually technical in nature and really empowering and sharing a lot of knowledge with everyone. So yeah, WomenWhoCode.com is where you should go to visit our events, and also our meetup group for Singapore. Yep. So next, what's the Interview Ready series? I actually created the Interview Ready series because, as you all know, preparing for an interview is really overwhelming. And especially in times like these, with like the pandemic, we were at the mercy of the companies we work for. What if we get retrenched? And we would really actually need 3 months to start preparing and getting back on track to even give an interview. So, and also a lot of us, we might be working in like toxic workplaces, and we continue to do so because we feel we won't get a job anywhere else. And it can be really tiring and scary to prepare for interviews. Therefore, we have this Interview Ready series monthly, where we will enable everyone in our community to be interview ready always. Whether you're planning to switch or looking for a new job or not, you should still be interview ready. And how do we plan to do this is by raising awareness on how to prepare, tips from our fellow women as well as men who have successfully managed to switch jobs, and so that we're all on top of things together. So with that, I'll introduce myself. I'm Saloni. I'm a software developer, and I have about 6 years of software development experience, and I love cleaning code. Like that's really gets me going. And today's interview ready session is on senior developer. So if you're not a senior developer yet, or if you're just aspiring, or if you have recently entered into the software development industry, do not worry. Gibson and I here are really friendly people. So just ask your questions. We will try to make it make it for juniors as well. But most of our content is a little bit more technical and for senior developers. Let's begin. So yeah, hello, Gibson. Maybe you can introduce yourself, Gibson.
Yep, thanks for the intro, Saloni. Yeah, so my name is Gibson. Got about 5 years of software engineering experience right now. I've got maybe two-thirds front end, 1/3 back end, and I'm a tech lead right now at Different, which is a prop tech in Australia. It's a prop tech startup in Australia. And the problem space they're working on is, for example, if you are a property owner in Australia, and if you need a firm that helps out with, say, you own a house and the faucet is broken, like Different will help you with that. Or for example, if you own a house and you need someone to, you need to find like tenants you need to find tenants basically. So like Different will fit into that picture. And I am reachable via the handle Nospig, which is not very creative handle. This is a reverse of Gibson, and then you just put an extra G and put an extra S. Yes, let's begin. Let's go to the next slide, and we will cover the table of contents for today's presentation. We will cover 5 key tips, and then we'll go over to types of interview rounds, and then we'll round it off with interview questions. Let's go to the first 5 tips. Oh yeah, and before that, you might want to make yourself a cup of tea because I believe it's I think it's about 6:44. So if your brains are already fried from work, then maybe to treat yourself to a little cup of tea and just enjoy, right? Sit back and relax and enjoy. As much as software engineering can be relaxing. You can go to the next slide.
I would also recommend you all to like get your notebooks and pens or like just your phone notes app, because we're going to be sharing lots of really useful tips and information. So it'll be nice if you can like note this down. Let's move on.
Yep. 5 key tips. Next slide. Yeah, so we'll be working through these points progressively, so don't worry if you forget. Let's go to the first one. Study effectively. I know this kind of sounds duh, but Saloni, next slide, please. Thank you. So I know this kind of sounds like duh, we need to study effectively, but what does it really mean, right? Like, so what it really means is that, when you were back in university, you were like cramming for the exams, you were just like, writing your thesis in like 1 week, right? So just try to recall those times and see what works for you, right? So, for example, if you saw your friend that, it's the kind of friend that says, I need to attend like all lectures. Or it's the kind of friend that just attends lectures and can get an A+ on the module. But if you try with the same method and then you only show up with a B, right? That means that the technique is not working for you. So in the same way, right? Like, for example, if you want to learn algorithms, you can, maybe perhaps like CRR, the gigantic book, right? I think it's like 300, 400 pages, ridiculous. If that's not working for you, then perhaps you might want to go YouTube and see just like video examples of how they describe how the certain algorithm works, right? Like, say, for example, merge sort, right? Like maybe a visual representation would be easier for you. Or maybe, when you're learning merge sort, perhaps making your own notes would help. Say, for example, you've noticed like this is the way that you usually tackle an algorithm problem, then you just write down, right? Like, this is what works for me. So maybe I work from input first, and then I study maybe perhaps reading code would be easy. So you could just write down, you just write down sort of pseudocode of how the algorithm works. Or perhaps like you're like kinesthetic learner. So for example, you just dive into LeetCode, you look at a problem statement and like, boom, it just comes for you, right? So just use the technique that works for you. And also closely related to that is also using the right knowledge sources, right? So say, for example, Geeks for Geeks is a great place to study algorithms. And then you have things like newsletter as well. So, you might not just be learning about algorithms, right? It may be about, technology comparisons, like, say, for example, most firms are sort of moving into Golang, or, like there's interest for Rust, right? So maybe newsletters, for example, Pragmatic Engineer might even have, articles about, these are the new languages which are coming up, and these are the experience reports. So, newsletters also are a source of information. You also have blogs, like, highly technical blogs from, people like Eric Elliott from Swix. They are both like very JavaScript heavy people. So, for example, if you are, a Ruby kind of person, then you might want to just follow Mats if he has a blog. Just basically follow the who's who. So you can just get just glean ideas, right? Like what are they thinking? What is the next big thing for the language, right? Or even forums, right? Like Hacker News. Like Hacker News has some quite interesting discussions, and just from, even if you're a newbie, I find like this kind of amorphous discussions, just seeing how this forum responses, right? I know how they just go back and forth, and the way that they build their arguments. I also feel like I learned a lot from them as well. Yeah. So for example, if it may be a question, it's just a like Hacker News thread about comparing Postgres versus MySQL. Then you just look at the arguments, right? Maybe you say, Postgres has better plugin support, or or just like discussions like that, right? Or like just how the way that they frame the arguments, like you can also study from them, essentially. Yep, I think that's all for point 1. You can go to point 2.
Before we move on to the next one, I just wanted to know, like from you, Gibson, I don't know if you have already mentioned, what is your way of studying? Like, what's your most effective way?
Oh, I'm like a big fan of making my own notes. So because what I realized was that, every time I got back onto the market to interview, I was always revising the same set of notes. I was always going back to, algorithms, it's going back to system design, going back to what was my work experience. So like, why bother recreating all of that when you can just, especially now we've got free Google Drive, like Google Docs, right? You might as well just write all of it out and, and then, you can just sort of tighten the loop even more. Like the more times you go through this, your own interview notes document, right? You can sort of refine it, and then at the end of the day, what you get is a very tight script. It allows you to just recall what are your key details, and also what are the things that you need to revise, instead of just like doing like just Google searches all the time, right?
And if like the audience, if you want Gibson to share his notes with you, he can do it, but only if you guys want him to. So do let us know in like the Zoom chat if you want him to share.
Yeah, I'm a big like notes
Sorry?
taking person. That's why. Yeah, for me, like making notes is the way that like I do well at exams. So the same thing applies here.
I've read your notes. They are actually really helpful for anybody, and they're actually really really easy to read through, and like the basic points are there. Yeah.
Thank you.
For me, I usually learn more from YouTube videos. I'm more visual. Like I understand a lot of the algorithms better when I see it explained on like a whiteboard by someone, and then I'll try to re-explain it to myself or to my friends on my iPad by drawing it out. That's how I'll understand a lot of things. Yep.
Yep. Second, which is I guess if a meta discussion would be like, am I oversharing in this presentation itself, right? So if you don't share what you know, the interviewers would just assume you know about nothing, or nothing about it. So this happened to me during one of the interviews where they asked me about my knowledge about testing software from a backend perspective, right? So what I just said was that I've used Supertest, Selenium, and Cypress. Note that this is all in the context of JavaScript, and then I just left it there. And then what happened was that they told me that if I failed the interview because I didn't know anything about testing. But the things that I've used these three before. So what you should do, as in what I think I should have done in my case, was say, hey, Supertest is used for testing like REST endpoints, right? Like it comes with an easy to use API, easy to assert what's the code. Should it be 200? Should it be 400, 403? Like what is the body? What is the response body? And like what are the headers that you set in order to set up the test, right? So Supertest is easy for that. Selenium and Cypress are both E2E testing frameworks. And then, this is the part where you can overshare, especially if you're related experience. So for example, for me, I say, Cypress has better developer experience. It has like a test runner that you can just select exactly which end-to-end test you want to run. And it also comes with like ability to mock responses. So you might not even need to set up like the whole backend setup, especially for firms which have a non-trivial backend setup, right? Like especially when you have like 14 microservices, right? Like you can't all run that locally, right? And neither can you run that in the CI, actually, as a matter of fact. You probably wouldn't want to do that. Yeah, and then you also go deeper into things like, for your integration test or end-to-end test, do you use an actual DB? So you can say, you can have arguments about, you use a DB because you want to test the actual query behavior. Or you can say, no DB because we have like 500 tests, and we prefer to use like Cypress mock responses. Like the organization thinks that it gets more value from using mock responses than using the actual DB instance. And then you can also talk about, I've also done contract testing before, using something like Pack.js.
Okay. Like one tip I would also like to share in this is when like it comes to these kind of questions where it's like, tell us more about testing or something, I would also try to gear more towards concepts rather than tech stack exactly. So like contract testing, that it's a concept, or end-to-end testing, and how exactly I would do that. Not really, I wouldn't want to mention too many softwares itself, like Cypress or like Docker containers. I'll just say containers, or it's a Docker especially.
Yeah, who could forget our favorite, which is the test pyramid.
Right.
The thought was classic.
Yes. So some background here. Gibson and I, we were ex-colleagues at ThoughtWorks. That's how we know each other. And Gibson used to be like a front, he is still a front-end expert, but he's now diving into back-end as well. So that's why he got this question, like from a back-end perspective. It's very specific in that way.
Yes, I'm still a little rough around the edges, so go easy on me. Yep, on to the next point. Yes, yes, breadth over depth. So what I think is that, especially if you were in the situation as I was, so what happened was that, I was just going to work all jolly, senior software engineer backend, boom, I got retrenched. So I just forced on the market, right? So in the case that if you're forced on the market, you don't really have a lot of time to prepare. So this is where, this tip comes in. This is the context in which the tip is given. So cover your bases first, then deep dive into your specialty. So for example, this is what it means by your bases, right? Like the focus areas, like algorithms, you got to know your merge sort, insertion sorts, your bubble sorts, you got to know your fizz buzz, you got your system design, which is that, what I said earlier, which is that, I did not mention that earlier. System design means like, for example, you need to know about your API gateway, about your databases, about your your different types of cloud compute, or your basically front end, back end, and infra. Oh, sorry, I actually covered that below. So system design, more of like, when do you use a queue? When do you use asynchronous? You have programming principles also, which is like, what is clean code, and other concepts which I cannot pick up off the top of my head. So you can already tell, like interviewing, like you need to prepare an interview. Yes, so you got front end and back end and infra as well. Front end is things like, React, back end is like, your Node.js, your GraphQL, and then infra is like, are you using things like ISE, infrastructure as code, Terraform? Are you using, like, depends on which school, right? Like if you are from team AWS, which I am, and then you'll be talking about your VPCs, your API gateways, your Lambdas, and your, what is that DB? I cannot, is that AWS DB? I forgot. But anyway, it's one of those DBs. Your Auroras. So you just gotta know, sort of just cover your bases, right? Because it would really suck if you go to the interview and if they ask you about infra and then you just suddenly just get stuck in the water. So cover your bases first, and then after that, like, be rigorous with your specialty. Then this is critical, especially for if you're applying for a firm which adopts like a specialized role kind of model, which you do see quite a bit, right? For example, Grab like often just hires like back-end engineers or front-end engineers, and full stack is not such a big thing, at least the last time which I was at Grab before I left. So if you're hiring for if you're going for a back-end role, then you need to be rigorous. Or like if you're going for a front-end role, then for example in the slides, if I may draw your attention to it, if you want to be a front-end specialist, you must focus, you must study like things like micro front-ends, performance optimization, monorepo, and so on and so forth. So that's just to make sure that is what they always call the T-shaped like developer, right? And I think, so as a senior software engineer, it should be fairly T-shaped. They don't expect you to be too specialized yet. I mean, it's about 2 to 4 years experience, so they're thereabouts. Next slide, please. So this is my recommended study approach. So cover your focus areas, deep dive into your specialty. And then the last one is, if you have the luxury of time, which you would not have if you suddenly got laid off, right? So then you need to critically ask yourself, what is the specific area that you would like to work on? Now, this is easier said than done because you would most likely at that point have quite a few interviews. So you need to be quite strict with your time. Like for example, if you are applying for a FANG firm, but then you realize that you're not very good at like dynamic programming problems. So so I just go and study DP problems. Or like if you are trying to go for a next level role, which I tried to go for a staff front end role, but then I failed the interview because I didn't know enough backend. So for me, the take home was like, okay, I need to learn more backend. Or say, for example, you want to be a principal front-end engineer, it's a focus role, but then you don't know enough front-end yet. So it really depends on what is the goal that you would like to go for, right? Is it like a FANG role, or for example, if you're applying to GitLab, right, then you definitely have to know Ruby. So if you came from like a Golang and Node.js background, then and you don't really have a lot of experience in Ruby, then you kind of have to deep dive into Ruby. If not, there'll just be a straight fail for the interview. Yep. Saloni, got something to add?
No, can move on to the next one.
All right, yes, I can just move on. Yes, so number 4, rehearse key questions. So yes, please prepare. So you see the questions on the right-hand side of the slides. Please prepare these questions as a matter of paramount importance. It's very important that you prepare for these questions because you will be asked these questions almost in every single company. So things like, tell me more about yourself. In the same way that I introduced myself at the start of this presentation, you need to have your elevator pitch, 5 sentences. Just get it out, right? Like years of experience. What are you a specialist at? What is your experience profile? Projects you delivered? Things like, what is your key strengths? These are your core competencies, right? So if it's a backend role, backend only role, then please tailor whatever you say to backend instead of talking about your front end or infra skills. What difficult situation do you encounter? This is talking about your soft skills. It can be like responding to a big incident or like working with other people, things like that. Achievement that you're most proud of, it just gives you an opportunity to shine in terms of, maybe you delivered on like a complex project that spanned like 3 teams that you needed to like align across all of them. Or even things like simple things like, the recruiter would just hold up your CV and say, oh yeah, you worked in ThoughtWorks, like, at the start of the career, right? Like, please explain your work experience. And it's very funny because like we assume that these things will not happen, but it actually does happen. So what happened is that they did that exact scenario to me, and I started fumbling. And it's a really bad look if you fumble on your work experience because people will start thinking that it's fake. So it's things like these are kind of key questions that, same thing, need to cover your bases, right? And then the last one obviously is like, do you have any questions for us? It's a good way to sort of earn nuggets, especially like, if you find some little things about within the companies like engineering blog, say like, they write an article about like front-end performance optimization. They could just say, oh, maybe I like your jokes, or about this point, maybe you can ask them to elaborate a little more on that. Yeah, so like, just ways to earn nuggets. Brownie points, sorry, not nuggets.
Like in this, I would like to add like, so Gibson, another friend of ours, and me, the 3 of us, we actually meet like every other week, and we do all these mock interviews with each other, and it's a very non-judgmental environment. And I think these kind of like small study groups are really good for our careers as well, because we get to practice, like rehearse our key questions very often, and we get to also rehearse things like system design, LeetCode, doing it under pressure, competing with the 3 of us, things like that. So that's also something I've mentioned in like the other interview ready sessions, that a community is really important. So yeah, do find like peers of yourselves that you can meet up with and practice rehearsing these key questions, rehearsing other algorithm problems and other types of interviews as well.
Yeah,
I
I personally found it I found like our sessions like very useful, especially, when I was trying to switch from a front-end specialist to right now tech lead role, right, which is more sort of broad role. I always ask them a lot of like stupid like backend questions, like, what are the backend tools that you use, or like, how do you choose a database, things like that, right? Like amorphous questions that I don't think like the Google answers may be very on point. Like Google will be able to give you a lot of documentation, but when you ask your friends, right, or you have a community, right, then you can see like the different ways that they kind of slice the question. I think there's a lot of value in that.
And we would also benefit from these questions that Gibson would ask, because then we would have to provide like, oh yeah, do read up on like the different DBs, and do read up on the different frameworks like Spring Boot or the other frameworks that there are, and we get a chance to also explain it to each other, and that also like, there'll be a lot of things I wouldn't know, that, oh, why exactly are we using Spring Boot for our project? It'll just make me think a bit more. So yeah, this rehearsing and finding this study group is very good as well.
Yes.
Let's move to the next one.
All right, next one. Point 5. Yes, except that it's a fuzzy process. So what I mean is that interviews can and will go wrong for all kind of reasons. So it's not always your fault. It's not just an absolute test of your algo skill. Say for example, if they ask you a question, say you're a front-end specialist, and then they suddenly ask you a question about like, go into great detail about like gRPC versus REST, right? And then that probably doesn't highlight your strength as a front-end expert, right? Or maybe they just ask you a question that you don't know about, like, if you're a front-end expert and they suddenly ask you about, oh, what are the latest like proposed like HTML5 standards from the WICG? And like, if you've never come across that, which I suspect most people wouldn't have come across that, then you just suddenly like you sort of land on your side and it doesn't look good. It's not your fault because I don't expect anyone to know all that like off the top of the head. Perhaps there might be other reasons, like they moved on with another candidate, or they suddenly went for a hiring freeze, which is quite common in today's like economic climate. And then there's also things that might be like interviewers are not fair to you, like for example, when they asked me the question about like backend testing, then I would say that maybe it's like split half, right? Like one part is that I did not like go on a verbal diarrhea about backend testing. Or the other one is that they just assumed that I didn't know anything. Yeah, so like maybe not fair, maybe fair, maybe not fair. Or perhaps it may be just that interviewers don't know how to give an interview well. Like in my case, I just recently interviewed like a software engineer too, like a mid-level in Australia. And then I quickly realized that, hey, maybe I might not be a very good interviewer. Like I didn't know like how to sort of lead on the interview well, like ask questions, help it be fluent, help the candidate be comfortable as well, things like that. Or it can be just a matter, or like next point, right, which is it can be just a matter that the role is not right for you. Like perhaps the role would be a downgrade, or it doesn't have the same level of responsibility, or maybe you're looking for a jump up and like the role is too junior. Or the other one, maybe money is not right? Like for example, you just slash 20K off your comp, right, and say, oh, this is the best you can do. Then it's like, no, sir, I would just go for another firm that maybe can pay me at least match my current comp. Yeah, so yeah, a lot of variables to take into consideration, which is probably why you should apply to at least 5 firms, I would say. Yeah, because just companies would just land on their side, or just like, or recruiters won't respond to you, things like that, right? Fuzzy process. Oh, we go next slide. Okay, then now we have completed part 1. I hope you're about a third way through your cup of tea, because we'll just go through very quickly through the types of interview rounds. Next slide. So I mean, this would just be a rough taxonomy about 8 types of interview rounds. It's not exhaustive. So the one that will happen at the front most likely will be the HR screen. So that's the one where you give your elevator pitch. And then you quickly realize that your elevator pitch, you will need to give them in every single interview. So yes, elevator pitch, very important. In the HR screen, they'll just ask you, tell me more about yourself. And then occasionally they might even, ask you some basic technical questions like, write a FizzBuzz, or like, what does JavaScript stand for? Or what is some syntax in the JavaScript, right? Then moving on, you pass your HR screen, you go into some firms, depending on the firm, you'll give you an algos challenge. So the live algos challenge, that is the one that Google is notorious of. They'll just give you a Google Doc and then ask you to write certain like solution to an algorithm problem, right? So that one's kind of dicey because you do have to prepare quite a bit. And in the case of Google, there is no IDE. So some firms they'll let you use like your preferred IDE, just like IntelliJ or VS Code or whatnot, right? But be prepared to write code without IDE. Or if they're a bit more gracious, they let you have an algos take-home challenge, which is like a LeetCode or HackerRank. Still also tests your ability to implement algorithms. Next slide. Yep, and then especially for since we're talking about senior developers, right? I think there will be an expectation for you to do well in the system design interview. So this system design interview mainly is just to test that you're able to create an end-to-end solution. And more often than not, it will involve the usage of cloud. So it will have like, for example, backend, they'll test you, oh, are you using an EC2? Are you using a Lambda? For front end, it'll be, usual deployment, which is CloudFront and S3. And then you have the general cloud, which is like, oh, how do you, like, do you use a VPC or, you use a Route 53 to just map the URL to your resource? So yes, just general system design, or even things like, oh, it's a async problem. Like say, for example, you need a backend system to just send out mail, right? Then probably what you want to do is you want to involve the use of a queue in the system design. Yep, and then we can move on to points 5 and 6, which is the assignment. Oh, hold on. Yes, so for assignment, yeah, no worries. For assignment, so this is where, I think it's not as harsh as the algos challenge. Assignment just tests your ability to understand a problem. For example, it might be, oh, it's a shopping cart kind of thing, right? So maybe it's a case of, we want a shopping cart, we want to apply a price, we want to apply a tax, we want to be able to check out a shopping cart, right? So yes, you need to write code under pressure, but more often than not, it tests your ability to create the correct abstraction and use the correct code structure. So abstraction is like, are you designing your interfaces correctly? Code structure is like, are you like wherever that need a new file, right? Or perhaps related code, high cohesion, put them in the same folder. Things like that, like even down to things like how you name your variables and how you group your variables within a certain file. And also it might involve some testing as well. Like especially if you write code that's easy to test, I think that will reflect well on your solution. The live assignment is also interesting in that they would try to leave like the problem definition quite ambiguous because they want to test your investigation skills. So they will leave it ambiguous so that you are then forced to ask questions about the problem space. So for example, in the shopping cart case, right, they will say, oh, there are some customers that that may have an email kind of thing. So in your case, in your mind, what you would think is that it's like, oh, does every customer have an email? Because if not every customer has an email, then we can set that as an optional field, right? Yeah, and then that will reflect in your design as well. Like if it's an optional field, then we need to check if it exists. If it exists, then we send out email. If not, we just skip that step. Yeah, and so that's for point 5. So for point 6 is a variant of point 5, except that point 6 is probably takes a lot more effort out of you. Because for point 6, what I have noticed is that firms usually expect a lot more. Yeah, that means like you got to have like a full set of unit tests. The coverage needs to be like 100%. And then, you need to set up your linters correctly. You got to have some E2E in as well, just to get like those bonus points, right? Which probably is the reason why, I think the recruiting industry is sort of slowly moving away from number 6, because they realize people are just not willing to invest the time in it. Yeah, or another way to look at it, right, is in my case, like I'm not that great at algos, right? So I will always more often than not I will pick the take-home assignment above algos. So sometimes it's also like a question of pick your poison, right? And I think, but yeah, that's like the smaller majority of firms. Like most firms, they don't let you choose what is the problem set. Yeah. Yes, we can go next slide then. Yes, so point 7 pairing is a variant of the assignment live, the live assignment, because point 7 requires you to pair. So if you're familiar with pairing, is that usually you have 2 people on one computer, and you will have one driver and one navigator. So the driver is the one that writes the code, and then the navigator is the one that sort of points, hey, okay, this is okay. Now you need to implement this other class. Now you need to implement this piece of logic kind of thing. So pairing is interesting because it tests your ability to actually elaborate on why you choose certain abstractions, why behind things, right? Why you choose an abstraction, why you choose to name the variable a certain way, why you structure your code a certain way. So there's I guess probably the first tip that the interviewers or like the interview advice, right, which is that when you're writing a solution, always talk. That's regardless of whether you're pairing or not pairing. Yep, and we are landing on the last one, which is cultural.
Can I
Cultural is
just
also,
add something
oh,
about
sorry.
the pairing rounds? Sorry.
Mm.
The pairing is also one of the ways you can get to know how the company is. So I usually, as an interviewer, would try to also make sure that I'm also giving something to the interviewee. For example, when I ask questions like, "Oh, why would you write this code this way?" and then he or she would go on to explain why he or she did that, and then I would also just add in my own 2 cents, like, "Oh, actually, did you know that using it, like if you use like stream.map.reduce, it'll be a little faster, or like reduces the number of lines." So interview also learns something, and it also reflects good on the company that, oh, if I join this company, might get to work with this developer who I can learn from, or who is friendly, or basically like the culture it as well from the pairing round.
Mm.
Yeah, that's what I look forward to during pairing rounds in interviews.
Mm.
It's not just about the interviewee, it's also the interviewer.
Oh yeah, especially like what Saloni said, right? It will be excellent, like if especially while you are, as in like the interviewee is able to learn something from the process as well, right? I think that would be greatly beneficial. Yep, on to the last point, cultural. So this one, essentially, they're just trying to figure out whether you are a good cultural fit. But I think this one is quite it's quite iffy in the sense that it really depends on like cultural fit is a very like amorphous concept, right? Like for me, how I understand it is that you got your usual stuff, right? Which is, oh, we've got like work-life balance, we are helpful, we mentor. But in the same way that they are interviewing you, like you are interviewing them as well. So at least what I can share from my experience is that there was one firm which I actually interviewed all the way to offer stage, but I had, and the money was right as well, and the role was right, but I rejected them mainly because through the interviews, like I did not feel comfortable in any of the interviews. So do also have that sixth sense within you, right? Like if you feel like, oh, like these are people that you can't really work with, or like just something's just not right, like from an interpersonal perspective, then like you should heed your sixth sense. Then I guess more normal things about culture is that they're just trying to figure out, if you're in a difficult situation, how do you handle it? How do you handle troublemakers? How do you communicate like to others that that you have technical problems or there are project delays, right? So those are also like the things that they try to assess for in a cultural interview. Yep, I guess we can go next one.
Yeah, well, we are on this. We actually have a related question from our audience in the Zoom chat. I'll just read it out from Mariana. In the interview, how to subtly ask about team culture and career path / opportunities.
You don't have to be
And
subtle.
then she goes on to say that oops, this is a technical round problem. It's okay. I think it's related. We are in the senior software developer interview session, so yeah, we will definitely help to answer this question. But yes, Gibson.
Yeah, sorry for interrupting. Mariana, thanks for the question. I would say you don't have to be subtle, especially for senior software engineers where we're sort of, it's sort of about 1 or 2 hops away from tech lead, right? So this is where you really need to dial in on like it's always the correct experience. It's always a question of correct experience, correct responsibility. Yeah, correct technical experience, correct responsibilities. So I would say definitely just go in and just ask the questions clearly. I'll cover team culture first. So team culture, they always just give you the HR spiel. But maybe you can ask about things like, how does the team cadence work like? Like how is the sprints? How do you like? Maybe you can ask them a bit more personal, right? A personal question, which is, do you occasionally work with team members that's outside the team, or have you like spoken with other staff engineers? Have they been helpful? About things about career path and opportunities. I definitely ask them, is there an engineering ladder? What is the opportunities for internal transfer? What are the general roles available in the company? Say, for example, if you want to be a DB specialist, then, okay, I'll make it even more context specific, right? Like if you want to be a front-end specialist, you probably want to go to a firm that has like a very big front-end setup. Like say, for example, Atlassian, Jira and Confluence, all front-end. Slack, where they have the front-end Slack client, they also have the Slack app, which I believe is written in JavaScript as well. But if you want to be a DB specialist, then you should go to like somewhere like a Redis or I think maybe Quadrant, which is like which builds plugin for Postgres, right? So really also a lot of it also depends on like the nature of the company and whether you can get the right experience. Hope I answered the question.
And that actually leads me to another. Oh yes, Mariana.
No, I'm just saying you are answering my question. Thanks very much.
Sweet.
Yeah, this also leads me to another like a tip. Like besides these different interview rounds, after every interview round, there is always do you have any questions for us kind of moment at the end of every round. So definitely that's where you should have questions. And these kind of questions are apt for any of these rounds actually. So like asking, how's your cross team collaborations like, or what features are you proud of that you have worked on? Like just ask the interviewer openly. Yeah. And also, while we're on the types of interview rounds topic, WomenWhoCode this year has, since we have released the InterviewReady series, we have done each of these rounds, not all of them, but some of them in quite a deep dive. You can look at our past interview rounds, InterviewReady series on YouTube on the WomenWhoCode channel. They're all recorded, as will be this session as well. So you can have a look. We also have on data science, behavioral, front end, technical rounds and stuff. So yep, do check us out there. Let's move on.
Sweet. All right, time to go into the chunky meat part of this presentation, which is the interview questions.
Yes, this is actually our most loved rounds in our most loved part of our sessions, the mock interview round, where Gibson and I would will be like interviewer, interviewee, and then we'll analyze our answers to these sample questions. But yes, before that.
Yeah, so yes, let's just level set first because we need to know like what bar we need to hit, right? If not, it doesn't make sense. Yep, so median year experience for senior software engineer in Singapore is about 2 to 4 years. For system design, you should be able to design a subsystem and write at least a technical proposal. It doesn't have to be as elaborate as RFC. Tech leadership, yes, you should be at a level where you should come to a place where you can start to informally mentor other developers within your team. Key point here is that you need to start to know what good looks like. In terms of programming language, you need to know 80% of a language. Say, for example, what I mean by 80% is that you should know the majority of the constructs in the language. So if it's JavaScript, you should know like what is the class keyword, what is the promise, what is promise, resolve, reject, promise.all. You should know what is the event loop. You should know the different types of different ways that you can compose like logic in JavaScript, which may be of class or just functional composition. In a dev workflow, you should know how to use some sort of version control, usually just Git. And in the build process, you should know, what is the CI? What do you usually run in CI, right? Which is usually you build the project, you lint the project, you test the project. Perhaps you even run some additional security checks like Snyk. And lastly, when writing code, yes, you should write working and clean code like most of the time. Because if you don't do this right, it will show up in the interview. Yeah, so write like, not working and clean code. By clean code, you also mean that you select the right abstractions, right? And if you don't know whether you're doing it right, rely on your own community. Just bounce off like your other developer friends. Yes, let's go to the next slide. yes, we can just go straight into, so for example, so the next question that will come up on the page will be an example of a deep dive question. Yep, Saloni, you can take it away. Oh, I think you are on mute. Yes, okay, you're back.
Yes. So I'll be the interviewer and Gibson will be the interviewee. So let's start. Hello, Gibson.
Hello, Saloni.
Yeah, so my first question would be, what is a React component and what does a good React component look like?
So a React component is a function block that is used to define a combination of HTML elements. It can contain state, can contain like event handlers like onClick, and also side effects like, or if a component is mounted, then we want to load some, we want to call some remote calls because we want the component to show some data, right? So maybe what good looks like is maybe a component is not so long, maybe less than 100 line, or like you using correct type annotation, especially if in TypeScript, or maybe the component like maybe doesn't have so many variables. Yeah, maybe that's how good look like.
Okay. So now we will transit into the section where we now analyze our answer. So we'll start with Gibson. What were you thinking of when you were answering? Like, I know it must have been difficult for you because you are a front-end expert and you're trying to give an answer which we can then dissect in later. But yes, what were you thinking as you were providing this answer? What worked, what doesn't work?
Yeah, so what didn't work was that we're not providing enough detail on what good looks like. And I think this ties in nicely to the whole thing about, as you grow in your seniority, you need to be able to define what good looks like, not just to yourself actually, but to like the rest of the people around you. And, especially for staff engineers, the rest of the organization really. So maybe in the answer, what you can go into is things like, like React component lifecycle, things like, component did mount, component will unmount, or error boundaries in React. Those are things that error boundaries, you only can achieve that with class components. You can't do that with functional components. Then you can also define things like what is a class component, what is a functional component. You can define like stateful and stateless components, especially stateless components are easier to test in general. And then you have best practices like, don't use props as state. If it's state, then you should just remain as state. Then you can also mention things like React hooks, and I am a big adherent of React hooks because you can just use functional composition to aggressively like recompose your application, right? Like especially if you have a component with like 10 hooks, 6 use states, 2 like on use callback, and then 2 use memos, then in the same way that you use the same way that you use like the normal form concept, right? Database normal forms, where they just group related variables. You can do the same thing for React hook as well. So it makes the code really clean that way. And then, for example, what good looks like, you can also use ESLint rules to help you, right? So there's like an ESLint JSX accessibility plugin, especially if your code base needs to be accessibility compliant. Or if you're a big adherent of clean code, you can also, as I did write a ESLint plugin for React clean code that enforces things like in React component you can only use a maximum of 5 hooks. The component can only be 15 lines long. If you are passing props into a JSX element, you can only use a maximum of 5 props, things like that. Yeah, so you can. These are the ways that you can define what good looks like.
And also things like it is easily tested.
Oh yeah, yes, yes, easy to test as well. Small point to note. Yes, the easier you make if the component is easier to test, then it gives less excuses for developers in the future to not write tests for it. Yeah. So oftentimes is that no, it's a tough game, right? It's the same thing about going to gym, right? Like if you stop lifting weights after a while, then like soon then you feel like, oh, you can't do it, you weren't performing the same way as before, right? It's the same thing for tests. Like if you start a code base off with code that's really hard to test, then people just kind of not want to test. Like they will just sort of grumble like, I don't like testing. But you see, if you make it easy to test, then people have no excuse.
So, okay, just a time check here. We are close to an hour now. We will now try to wrap up the last few. We only have, I think, 2 more questions. I will just wrap that up. But meanwhile, do ask us any questions that you have, that you might have regarding senior developer interviews. Like we would like to help you better if you can ask us questions.
Yeah,
If not, we'll just
maybe we can just go to Q&A directly, because I guess the rest of the slides, what I was trying to illustrate was that the kind of genres of questions, right? So the first one, which you just covered, was a deep dive question. It just dives into a very specific area, like a React or like a GraphQL server, right? Then the next one can be comparisons, which is like, you can just go to the question, Saloni. Yeah, things like, compare your tech stack, right? Like, maybe you worked in the AI before, or that was very Python heavy. And it makes sense because, like in AI, like most of the libraries are written in Python. Whereas, if you are, if it's more of a, like you're always manipulating JSON, right? Then maybe JavaScript is the better language, because if you have ever tried manipulating a JSON object in Java, is a big pain in the butt. So, yeah. And then the last genre of question would be scenarios. If you can go to the next slide. So, sometimes they'll just give you a problem statement, right? Like, production incident has occurred. Like, describe how you will handle a situation. So for this one, just describe the production incident, like how do you handle one of these, right? Like, have like an incident coordinator, create a Slack channel, look at the right alarms, and then try to fix the bug. If you can't fix the bug, just reverse the last commit, things like that. Yeah.
And that would be all our questions, all of our content that we have for you today. Do follow us on our socials. I see no one really has asked any other questions besides Mariana, but I do have some questions for Gibson that we usually receive from our community in our previous sessions and on our socials as well. That would be, you did mention like you are team AWS, right? And you know a lot about the AWS products as well. Do you think it is like, as a aspiring senior developer or as someone who would like to switch, should I be investing time into getting the AWS cloud cert?
I think if you're a backend developer, it's a nice plus, because or if you're infra developer, it's a nice plus because you kind of would already have that knowledge. So why not just spend like 7 days and then you just get the cert, right? For front-end developer, as was my case, I would say it's a very bitter pill to swallow, but you probably have to swallow it anyway, because I think that these cloud certs, like it may not be AWS, right? It can be GCP, it can be like other cloud providers, right? But as long as you just take one, I think it's just a great place to learn about all the compute offerings, all the cloud, basically all the cloud services, right? I think it's very, very important. Especially, now that you consider that you need to be able to do well with the system design stages. Yeah, that's where, system design will only get more intense as you climb up the ladder. Yeah. So might as well just start now, right? So I think this cloud certs is a very concise way of learning about the cloud. Yeah, like don't be scaling through like the AWS documentation. Yeah, it's not very effective way of studying.
Yeah, like even from personal experience, I do not have a AWS certification yet. I will be getting it sometime soon, hopefully. But definitely, I've seen most of the projects I've been on, we're always on using AWS, and we are always there's always a DevOps team who manages most of it. But it's always nice for me to also understand how and where things got stuck, so that I can also jump in and quickly help, instead of asking the DevOps team to look into it, and they will provide me with the logs. So like, okay, I just have to look at these logs now. And also creating a new product, it'll be good if I can also know when to use S3, what are the advantages, disadvantages of that. Yeah. We do have some questions from the audience.
Yeah, let's take those.
Move to that. So Ella has asked, what are the differences between front end versus back end system design round?
I'll just go for backend first because that is really the majority of system design. So for backend, they will test you on what DB you should use. Like, should it be NoSQL or SQL? They might even go into details of how you actually design the schema or the NoSQL schema. If you're using, sometimes they may even go into single table design, right? Which is the AWS database, which I will search now. Not the statement doesn't make sense. What is the database? Just give me like 5 seconds.
Do you mean the Aurora thing?
No, DynamoDB. Yes, DynamoDB. Who could forget that?
DynamoDB.
Yeah, that's the one is a single table design. Yeah, and then you'll just be expected to just design it straight away. So I was talking about databases. Then you talk about queues, right? Are you using a RabbitMQ or Kafka? Depends on your use case. You also go into types of compute. Is it do you just use the plain old EC2, or are you using the are you using the Elastic Compute Service, which is based on Docker, or do you just go with Lambda, right? So they just test you on how to compare those things. And then caches, of course, you have Redis and the other one, which is Memcached. Yes, that's right. So that is mostly the gist of the backend design. Yeah, might even throw in the API gateway just to test you on like what kind of caching, right? And how you map the ALB to or how you map your compute to the API gateway, right? Which is via the ALB or load balancer. And then for the front end, this is where it will be slightly different, because for the front end, they will then ask you about, when do you use a micro front end, or like compare like, server-side rendering versus client-side rendering. Or they talk about for server-side rendering, what are the options? You can use Gatsby or even the static site generation, right? The SSG. So static site generation, which is Gatsby, server-side rendering, which is Next.js. I think there's the Next.js, Remix. There's Nest.js, which is the Vue one, and then I think you have one equivalent for Svelte as well. And then client-side rendering, which is just React, Vue, and Angular. Yeah. So the system design looks slightly different for front end. And then I guess for front end, they'll just go into more details of how do you reduce your bundle size, how do you improve performance, things like that. Hope I answered your question for the first one.
We also do have a front-end InterviewReady series where we went through a front-end system design question. That would be useful for you too, Ella. Let's move on. Like, was that good enough, Ella? Yeah. Yeah. So let's move on to the next question. Do you have any tips for behavioral/hiring manager round?
Tips. Behavioral hiring manager. Maybe. I think maybe one of the things that you need to. Okay, maybe I'll just take the hiring manager one. Just behavioral is more of like, okay, how do you handle this difficult situation, right? Right, yes. There was one interview where I failed because they said that I was not assertive enough, because they were trying to hire a senior front-end engineer. And I gave the dumbest answer, which is, I just follow my tech lead, which is not what I did like for most of the time, because the only reason why I followed the tech lead in that scenario was because he has the final authority, really. As much as I want to disagree with his design, right? But most of the time, you want to illustrate that you are able to propose your own designs and defend them. Yeah, so that's the behavioral one, and defend them in without being a jerk, right? Within your team. So I think one of the key points of being a software developer is that you hold opinions. There's this saying, something about hold, like loosely held strong opinions. Yeah, correct. Like strong opinions, but you hold them loosely. So part of which is also that, you know, you want to defend your design, but you're open to other suggestions as well. And I think one of the nice parts about that is also that, you know, you don't have to defend your design so fiercely, right? Like if other people can add to that design and make something better, then all the better, right? It just makes your design better, and there's less stress for you to just like produce that final product, right? So that's behavioral. You know, being able to work with other developers to find an ideal design. And then you have the hiring manager round. That one is very important, because if it's the hiring manager, it means that the person that you would actually work with. So you can ask about very specific things about team culture, what is the on-call schedule, what are the, yes, and very important, especially you're thinking about getting the right experience. To answer the question of, will you get the right experience at this job? You can ask very specific things like, oh, you know, is this job going to just be back-end only task? Will it be like a full stack kind of thing, or is it front-end only? Because how I used this principle in my case was that when I was being hired to be a tech lead, I was very specific. I asked them, is this role going to involve a lot of engineering management things like one-on-one catch-ups, things like performance reviews? And because I have deemed that that is not the type of work that I want to do at the present moment, not that it's not important, it's just that, you know, not a focus area at the time for the time being, I was very explicit with them. I just said, if you give me any of these EM roles like that, then I would not be interested in the role. Yeah. So these are the kind of specific questions that only the hiring manager will have the right answer to these. Yeah, because that will be the exact situation that you'll be working in, right? Yeah. So just have a think through. You know, there's a lot of strategy in terms of how to choose the right job, right? And you know, whatever that comes from like downstream from what was your ultimate goal, right? If your goal is like, okay, I need to be a backend expert, right? Then you probably don't want a role that, like, you know, they will just, you know, make you spend half of the time doing front end things. Yep.
I've linked like the past recorded sessions on the front end session as well as the behavioral session. Hopefully that also helps you. Give you some tips. Yeah. And if there are no more questions, I do have one last question, Gibson.
Yes.
This question is mainly as someone who is trying to be a senior software developer. It's not me. I'm just speaking on behalf of my audience. If I've been stuck in my software development job, it's not stuck, isn't it? I don't have title of a senior software developer, but it's been 5 years that I've been at this company. Some of my peers have been promoted to senior software developer. What are some things that I can do to get promoted, or is the title not important? What would you suggest?
For better or for worse, title is quite critical in this industry. And or to be specific, a title that means something, right? So a head of engineering in a startup, in a 10-man startup probably means a lot less than a head of engineering at Google. Yeah, so you know there is a weight to title. Maybe answering straight to your question. I think that I think this is a general principle that applies everywhere, is that wherever you are working, it needs to provide you some value. Like, you know, are you learning new responsibilities in your new role? As in, I just recently accepted a tech lead role, right? So, you know, this is exactly what I need for my career, right? You know, are you growing technically in a certain area? Like, you know, they just transfer you to the DevOps team. Oh, sorry, like developer experience team, or DevOps even. Like, that's okay. Like DevOps and like, oh, I want to be a DevOps experience because it roughly pays the 10-20% more than for the same role in the market, right? Like, it needs to provide you that value. Or like perhaps, you know, you're working in a government job and it provides you the work-life balance. Like, so what is the value that the job is providing to you, right? how does it look in overall the way that it builds your CV. So for me, I would drive like my thoughts using that paradigm. Maybe at your workplace, so that's more of like, okay, that's internal locus. Let's flip it to the external locus, right? Which is things that are around you. So perhaps you were under a boss that like doesn't like you, and that's why you're not getting a promotion, even though you're performing the same role as all the other like developers or senior developers in this case. Then I would say it doesn't make sense for you to stick around. That's what happened to me, right? I was in Grab and I had a boss that just penalized me because I failed to deliver on one project, and then he just chucked me to the side. And I was in the gutter like for a good like 6 months. That wasn't working for me, so I just left. And then there was okay, so that's one. Boss doesn't think highly of you. And it's very important actually that your boss is on sort of like either neutral or on good terms with you, because if you're on negative terms with your boss, then the boss is the one that has bought at least 50% of the say in your promotion. So if he's not going to find a promotion for you, then it's game over essentially. Other structural factors, maybe they don't want to pay you enough. Maybe the company is just paying like 40% under market. Then it doesn't make sense to stick around. Maybe other factors like maybe they're just not giving you the right experience. They're just tossing you like all these service tickets to create accounts, and or maybe just to disable some some permissions kind of thing. Whereas like your actual role is that, oh, you want to be a serious backend developer, right? So it's wrong responsibility, like just get out as well. Yeah, so I think I'll just guide it along those principles. So it needs to provide you, it needs to build your CV. And yeah, I mean, right now I take the same approach as well when I'm looking at like the devs that are working under me, right? Which is that I need to provide them with a piece of work that they can put in the CV. Yeah, if after 6 months I cannot provide them work that sort of builds their competency, right? Then I think that's a failure on my part. So always value.
Yep.
Yeah, always provide. The job needs to build your value. Yeah.
That's really useful information. Thank you so much, Gibson. And yep, thank you our audience for joining us. Please do help to fill up our feedback form, follow us on our socials. And if you have any other questions for Gibson, please do direct us on our socials or our email. We will get Gibson to answer them for you. Yep. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Gibson. Yep. All free to go now. Thank you.
Thank you very much.